Welcome to today's event, everyone, with the title of Heterogeneous Trade Elasticity and Managerial Skills. I'm Mahdi Ghodsi, and I'm an economist from the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. First of all, sorry for my voice. I got a bit cold, and I will try to drink more water to change my voice. Actually, today we are kicking off the first seminar in international economic series seminars, which are organized by the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies jointly with FIW, or research or International Research Center in Vienna. Today's presenter is Gianluca Orefice, who is a professor at University of Paris-Dauphine, and this presentation is based on a paper that is co-authored with Maria Bass, Lionel Fontanier, and Irene Giudice. And this event is part of the series seminars in international economics. And these seminars are intended to be a forum for presentations and discussion of current research findings in the field of international economics, which are focusing on three major topics: international trade, foreign direct investment, and migration. And in order to tell you about the housekeeping rules, we usually have these presentations for about 30 to 40 minutes. And after that, there will be a Q&A session at the end, so that you have the chance to ask your questions and insert your comments. And usually we encourage participants to ask your question in the chat. And if the question is very pressing that could help us understand the material of the slides better, I will ask the question myself. Otherwise, we keep those questions for the end of the session, which is the Q&A session. And to tell you about this seminar, it is being recorded, and a copy of this record will be uploaded to the wiiw YouTube channel, so that other people who couldn't join would be able to listen to this interesting paper. And in order to introduce the speaker, Gianluca is a professor at University of Paris-Dauphine and a research fellow at CIFO in Munich and CEPI in Paris. He was previously an economist at CEPI in Paris and a visiting professor at the University of Bergamo in Italy. And he was consultant at the Economic Research and Statistics Division of the WTO. He holds a PhD in economics from University of Milan and a Master in Management, Economics and Industrial Engineering from Polytechnic Milan. He was a visiting scholar at University of California, Berkeley, and a student at University Catholic Leuven. And he published a lot on international trade and migration in several high-ranked journals like Journal of International Economics, European Economic Review, Journal of Comparative Economics. And he is also a member of the editorial board of International Economics, because his main research focuses on international trade and migration, trade policy, and applied econometrics. So thank you, Gianluca, for joining us today and presenting your excellent work. Actually, I like the topic of the paper, and I look forward to hear what you will present today. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for this very kind introduction, and welcome everybody to this seminar. It's a pleasure for me to present this paper, even if online version at the wiiw Institute. I'm Gianluca, by the way, and I'm gonna present this ongoing project. So just let me start by stressing that this is very preliminary. So what I present today is just the results of an effort that we made over the last 4 weeks to improve on our estimations. This is a joint project with Maria, Lionel, and Irene. So Maria is University of Paris 1, Lionel, Banque de France, Irene, University of Bielefeld. And as you can easily argue from the title, this is a paper on trade elasticity and in particular, a paper on heterogeneous trade elasticity, and the source of heterogeneity we give to this trade elasticity is on the workforce composition of firms. So let me start by motivating a little bit the paper. The main motivation relies on a very old, I would say, puzzle in the macroeconomic literature. There is this called the elasticity puzzle by Rule 2008, but then this puzzle has been found in many other papers. And the idea of this puzzle is basically that the elasticity of aggregated exports to a real exchange rate is strangely low, and in particular lower than other foreign shocks. So from theory, we would expect that the elasticity of aggregate exports to any foreign shock has almost the same elasticity. In particular, if you live in a constant elasticity of substitution world, then any shock, tariff shock, marginal cost shock, but also real exchange rate shock should produce almost the same elasticity. The point that has been highlighted in this literature is that this is not the case. This is far from being the case. Just to give you some number, the elasticity of aggregate export to a tariff shock is around 5–7% is what the literature found. Elasticity to marginal cost of firms, we have a paper with Lionel and Philippe on that, and the elasticity is -5. And surprisingly, the elasticity of aggregate export to exchange rate is something around 0.5, 0.6. So there is a puzzle. There is already some solution, some possible explanation for such a puzzle in the literature. And this is mainly based on heterogeneous elasticity. So the idea is the following. The idea is that the aggregated elasticity of aggregate exports is the result of a composition. So basically, why aggregate export reacts so small, so with a lower elasticity, because you have many firms that export tiny share, export very tiny part of total export. They have a very high elasticity. But high-performing firms that constitute the big chunk of total export, they are basically inelastic. So if you aggregate everything, you end up with a very small elasticity to aggregate export, but the underlying channel is that's why we have heterogeneous elasticity. And the first source of heterogeneous elasticity is based on firm productivity and product quality. So you have the paper by Berman and co-author in the Quarterly Journal of Economics saying that, okay, the reason for that puzzle is basically the fact that high productive firms are less elastic. And that's why at the aggregated level, we observe this small elasticity to real exchange rate. In this paper, what we do is basically adding a new channel, a new explanation to the macro puzzle. And the new thing is that we base this new explanation on the workforce composition of firms. Okay, so this is something really new. Before jumping into the theory or the econometry, just let me give you some easy intuition, let me sketching a little bit what we have in mind intuitively, etc. So imagine the case of depreciation. In case of depreciation, all the exporters in a given country, so in the home country, will experience a relative reduction in the production cost. So there will be an increase in the import demand in the foreign country, and all the firms are supposed to export more because such a positive shock. Because of that shock, firms in the domestic market in the home country can charge higher price. And they do so. We do observe in the data that they actually pricing into market. Because of a change in the exchange rate, they are able to increase the price. So this is pricing into market strategy. But the point is the following. Firms do not pricing into market homogeneously. There is a heterogeneous pricing into market facing a common shock of the real exchange rate. So the shock is common, but the way in which the firm reacts in pricing into market is heterogeneous. In our paper, we focus on the heterogeneous based on managerial intensity. The intuition is the following. managerial intensive firm, conditional on productivity, of course. So for a given level of productivity, managerial intensive firms are more able to deal, to combine, let's say, inputs in production, sorry, and are more able to manage production workers in production. So this implies lower coordination cost, higher margin. So when there is a shock, a common shock at the depreciation level, high managerial intensive firms are less elastic in terms of demand, so they are able to charge higher price, and the export quantity elasticity is also reduced. So this is the big channel we have in mind. Let me just tell you in few sentences what we do and why this is potentially interesting for the profession and for policymakers. What we do is just studying the role of workforce composition, and in this paper, we base on the share of managers in the firm, on the pricing into market strategy, and incomplete pass-through to real exchange rate. So this is the research question. Why we think this is interesting, and which is the contribution to the previous literature? Well, the main contribution to me is that for the first time, we point to the workforce composition of firms as a potential explanation for this heterogeneous elasticity and for the macro elasticity puzzle. So we provide really something new as a potential explanation for the elasticity puzzle, and this is based on workforce composition. So these are two extremely original points and contribution of our paper. An important thing I want to mention up front, so starting from the very beginning of the presentation, is that we don't say that our mechanism is the only mechanism at play. We say that our mechanism is something that works on top of what other papers have already found. So our channel work, and I will show you a dedicated slide on that. Our channel works on top of the productivity channel, on top of the marginal cost channel, on top of the quality product channel. So this is something new, and it's valid on top of all others' explanation. What should we care? So if you are scholars and academics, I think that such a contribution on the macro puzzle is sufficiently interesting enough. But if you're a policymaker, why we should be interested in this type of works? The point is that we strongly think that for policymakers, understanding the determinants of the elasticity of aggregated export to a shocking price, it's important. So I think that for policymakers, really understanding what's behind such a low elasticity of total export to a given change in real exchange rate shock is important, also to settle, also to build ad hoc macro, but also fiscal policies. In terms of literature review contribution, we base, of course, we base on the pricing to market and firm performance literature. So there is a huge literature saying that high productive firm and high performing firms have a stronger and a higher pricing into market. So this is the paper by Nicholas and Cotter, so Berman, Meyer, and Martin paper, Cartergy paper, Amiti and Cotter 2014. So there is already literature suggesting that the productivity of the firm is important in understanding the heterogeneous pass-through. With respect to this literature, we basically propose a new channel, which is the workforce composition of firms. The second stream of literature that we build on is that on management practices and firm performances. We know from this literature, which is widely dominated by Bloom and Marlinen papers, that the performances of well-managed firms are higher than other firms. And this is, they have higher productivity, higher export performances, larger revenue, so on and so forth. So with respect to this literature, we basically propose a new outcome, which is the heterogeneous pricing into market. So we say that managerial intensive firms not only have superior performance, but they also have stronger pricing into market behavior. With respect to the literature on pricing into market and quality, so this is the paper by Howard and Chanet, Antoniades paper in Zanimoni, 2016. So there are papers saying that the heterogeneous elasticity depends on the quality of the product. But what's behind the quality of the product? We propose, once again, the managerial intensity. So we base on these three building blocks in terms of the literature, and we propose some contribution to each of these building blocks. I forgot to mention, feel free to stop me if you have questions during the presentation. So just let me give you some preview of the results in case I won't be able to conclude, in case I won't have time to conclude. After depreciation of the real exchange rate, there is, of course, a pricing into market strategy on average. So on average, after 10% increase in the real exchange rate, there is an increase of 0.8% in the export price. So this is the standard pricing into market behavior with an average pass-through of 92%. This is interestingly exactly the same elasticity found in the QJE paper by Nicola and co-authors in 2012. So exactly the same. However, managerial intensive firms, so firms that have a managerial intensity, a share of manager on total employment of one standard larger managerial intensity, they react by increasing price by 1.2%, that correspond to a 88 pass-through. So these are significantly lower pass-throughs and significantly stronger pricing into market. This, of course, reflects into a different and heterogeneous import demand price elasticity. So the average firm, in presence of a depreciation of the exchange rate, increased the export quantity by 3%, but the managerial intensive firm only by 2%. Okay, so there is also this in terms of export quantity. I cannot tell you right now the elasticity of export value, because the export value is the results of the elasticity to export price and the elasticity to export quantity. So we are currently working on it, because this is not obvious. It's not just like putting export value as an outcome, click on regression and give you the outcome. Because to do this properly, we need the sample must to be comparable, the set of control must be the same, so on and so forth. It's not an obvious task, but we are currently working also giving you heterogeneous elasticity of export values, not only price and quantity. The outline, I'll give you theoretical motivation, of course, because I think this is an interesting part of the paper. Then I jump to the data and some descriptive evidence, and then I will spend much of my time on the identification strategy, and then I will present the results, conclusion, and if I have time, I also have a slide on the next steps, just to give you an idea on what we are going to do in the next month on this project. Theoretical motivation. Long story short, in order to have heterogeneous elasticity to real exchange rate, we need heterogeneous price elasticity of demand. So we need that for a given price shock, the demand for firms is heterogeneous. Okay, so this is the key ingredient. Of course, you cannot have this type of ingredient in a constant elasticity of substitution model, because you have constant markup, so there is no way of obtaining heterogeneous elasticity in a CS framework. But in many, many different types of trade models, you might obtain heterogeneous elasticity of demand to prices. And for example, in these slides, I list the two main theoretical frameworks that predict heterogeneous elasticity. The first is the linear demand system, as in Melisen Ottaviano paper, and the second is the imperfect competition a la Cournot, as in Atkinson and Barstein paper 2008. So basically, both these two contributions, starting from different assumptions, concludes that there is an heterogeneous price elasticity of demand depending on firm characteristics. So if you live in a Melisen Ottaviano model, the idea is that high productive firms have a lower price elasticity of demand, so they are less elastic to demand. So what happens when there is a depreciation of the real exchange rate? The export of the domestic country becomes relatively more convenient, so there will be an increase in the import demand from destination. So there is a positive shock in the import demand. Such a positive shock in the import demand implies the possibility for firms to charge higher price in the export, and firms do so, and this is the case of pricing into market, this is the case of incomplete pass-through. But the interesting point of a Melitzer-Ottaviano model is that because of heterogeneous elasticity of price of demand to prices, large firms are able to charge even higher prices when there is a depreciation. So the depreciation is common to all firms, but high productive firms are able to charge even higher price at the export. Why? Because the elasticity of demand to price for high productive firms is smaller. This is the idea. And we live in this specific framework. So I will present you a model based on Melitzer and Ottaviano. But just to mention, the same type of channel works in an imperfect competition a la Cournot paper. The only difference is that in Atkinson and Bernstein paper, the heterogeneity comes from a different channel. There is based on the market share. So in that type of paper, firms that have large market share within a sector, they have a lower price elasticity of demand, lower elasticity of demand to prices. So when there is, once again, a real exchange rate depreciation, it becomes relatively more convenient for foreign consumers import from my country. Because of that, firms will charge higher price, so pricing into market. But high market share firms, because of the lower demand elasticity, they charge even higher price at destination. So this is the main mechanism. In our specific paper, the theoretical motivation is very easy, I would say. It's a kind of Mickey Mouse model, if you want, but interesting because basically we nest the recent idea by Bao, Varinen, and co-author 2022 paper in a standard Melitzer-Ottaviano model. So the idea of Bao, Varinen, and co-author is that managers in the firm contribute to increase, to reduce the coordination cost and increase the efficiency of the firm. So basically conditional of a given marginal cost, so on average productivity, firms that have a higher share of managers are even more productive. So how do we model this thing in a Melitzer-Ottaviano framework? There is a continuum of firm. Each firm produces with a linear production function. So the quantity of a given firm Qi depends on input Li. This is the number of production workers in the firm, but also on a let's say productivity, theta I. But theta I is the overall productivity, and this level of theta I depends on two things: on the marginal cost, Ci. So the lower is the marginal cost, the higher is the productivity of the firm theta, but also, and this is the new thing, also on the managerial intensity lambda. Lambda is how managerial intensive is the firm. And in the spirit of Bao, Varinen, and co-author, this also affects the overall productivity of the firm. If you do so, you can simply, this is what we obtain in a standard Melitzer-Ottaviano model. So this is the inverse demand, the inverse demand function. So piece price, epsilon is the nominal exchange rate, alpha, gamma, and beta are the parameter of the quadratic utility function. Then the quantities, small q and big Q, capital Q, is just firm-specific consumption and total consumption in country J. But the interesting part is that if you solve the model and you derive the optimal quantity, the optimal price, you see that the optimal quantity that we export from country I to country J depends first on the exchange rate. So at the denominator you have epsilon, which is the nominal exchange rate, but also on this theta star. And theta star depends, here we go, on the nominal exchange rate, EJ. Then, sorry, on the real exchange rate. The real exchange rate is defined as in any macro model. So is the nominal exchange rate times the labor cost in a foreign country divided by the labor cost in the domestic country. So this is pretty standard in this literature. And if you substitute all the components in the quantity and price function, you take the partial derivative and you obtain that actually the elasticity of export prices, so this eta thing, so delta P over delta E multiplied by E price, so the elasticity of export prices to real exchange rate, first of all, is positive, because as we know from Melitz and Ottaviano, when there is a depreciation, there will be an increase in the pricing into market. So nothing new, something that we knew from Melitz and Ottaviano. The new thing is that the extent of such an elasticity increase with the managerial intensity lambda. Okay, so the higher is the managerial intensity of the firm, the higher is the extent of the elasticity of export price to a common real exchange rate shock. Second interesting conclusion on the export quantity. The elasticity of export quantity has this equation here. This is positive once again. There is a depreciation, you export more, makes sense. But interestingly, the extent of this elasticity reduces with the managerial intensity lambda. Okay, so by simply plugging the Bauer and Varinen idea of managerial intensity in a standard Melitz and Ottaviano framework, we obtain and we do observe the elasticity of export price and export quantity to a common real exchange rate shock depends on the managerial intensity. Of course, it depends also on productivity. You have marginal cost there. So the standard channel, this 0.2 in this slide. So the fact that the elasticity of export price to exchange rate increases with the productivity is there. So this is in our model. But on top of that, such an elasticity depends positively on the managerial intensity on the export price side, and negatively on the managerial intensity on the export quantity side. Okay, so the testable implications are: first, firms with a good and high managerial intensity are more elastic in terms of export prices. So when there is a depreciation, they have an even stronger pricing into market. The second testable implication is that in terms of export quantity, managerial intensive firms are less elastic. Okay, and this is what we are going to test in the empirical part of the paper. Man, no way of time. Let me skip this empirical motivation. In this graph, we basically correlate the heterogeneity in skill intensity of firms with the heterogeneity in the elasticity to real exchange rate. The correlation is positive. Basically, yes, in line with our theoretical framework. In destination where there is a spread of distribution in terms of skills and managerial composition, there is an even higher heterogeneity in the elasticity to real exchange rate.
Sorry, Gianluca, one question. How do you measure the skill intensity, or what does it mean? Or how do you measure managerial intensity?
Yeah, so I have a slide on that. So let me anticipate. So yeah, how do we measure? From the DIADES data, so this is Déclaration Annuelle des Données Sociales. So these are matched employee data, pretty standard nowadays. So for each worker, we know the employing firms, but more importantly, we know the occupation. So we know in which occupation the worker is employed. And we can infer from the labeling of the occupation whether this is a manager or not. Just to give you a precise definition, we use as a proxy for managers PCS code 37 and 38. These are managers and sales managers, engineers and business executives. Okay, so this is our definition. And then we have already a robustness check using only 37. It seems to be a little bit more precise definition of managers. So this is our current definition. In the next steps, so in the to-do list, we are currently working also on another definition, which is based on the STEM and ONET definition of managers. This will be a little even more precise, but this is an ongoing project. So for the time being, this definition: sales managers, engineers, and technical executives. This is the definition of managers.
So in that case, is there any possibility that this intensity converges to one, like a firm that has only managers?
No, this is a good point. We exclude firms below 5 employees. So no. And then let me give you some statistics. I don't have the max here, unfortunately, but just to give you some idea, the average managerial intensity is 12%. If you consider only the classification 37, this is 5.2%. So
out of 10, one out of 10, 1 out of 20.
Yeah, more or less.
1 out of 9.
Great. So very briefly going back to the data. So I just anticipated you the mentioned planetary data. As for the export data, we use the French custom data. So that these are once again pretty standard custom data. For each French firm, we know the export quantity, the export value, so we can compute the unit value for a given product, HS6, for a given destination, and for a given year in the period 95-2008. Okay, so universe of firms exporting in each destination a given HS6 in a given year. Let me, of course, since we are working on exchange rate, we focus only on non-EU destination. So we focus only on destination when there is some variation in the real exchange rate. As for the macro variable, they come from Penward table in the IMF, International Financial Statistics. This is for the definition of the managerial intensity that I already told you. This is for descriptive evidence. Why I put in blue these numbers here, because I think that there is an interesting feature with the workforce composition of firms, at least in France, and the distribution is very skewed. I don't have a graph, a kernel density here, but just by comparing the median and the mean, you see that this is very skewed because the mean is basically is very higher, is larger than the median. And this is a very interesting pattern in our data that we are going to explore in the next step by looking at different moments of the distribution. Good. As for the empirical strategy, so let me spend some minutes because I think this is an important point to convince you that we have something causal, at least. The outcome variable, the main outcome variable is the log of the export price. So the export price is a unit value. So this is the value of a specific firm exporting a specific product in a given destination time t divided by the export quantity. Okay, so this is a proxy for price, if you want. This is a standard proxy for price in international trade. The subscript I, P, C, and T stand for firm I, product P, country C, at time T. The main variable of interest are the real exchange rate, so RERCT. This is destination time specific, of course. And in the empirical part, let me be careful on that point. In the empirical part, we approximate the real exchange rate as nominal exchange rate epsilon times the ratio of prices. Why? Because we don't have the ratio of wages, because theoretically speaking, we should have, let me show you this slide, we should have the ratio of wages, but we don't have wages for the 200 destination countries we have in the data set. So we use the aggregate price. Okay, it's a proxy. But this is once again something pretty standard in the literature and in the macroeconomic literature. The second important variable is the interaction between the exchange rate, the real exchange rate, and the managerial intensity of the firm, which is firm I specific. And we keep this share at the beginning of the sample to avoid any endogeneity issues. Okay, so we keep a managerial intensity in 95 to avoid any spurious correlation between omitted variable maybe and the workforce composition of the firm. Very last point. Sorry, we control.
Sorry, I don't understand here the endogeneity that you're discussing.
The point is that maybe you might imagine stories that the workforce composition of the firm, so the share of managers, depends on the pricing. So imagine that, for example, an omitted variable problem could be an unobserved, which is unobserved destination time shock, for example, technological shock that affects the number of managers that each firm has inside. You might imagine story, for example, of productivity shock You might imagine stories on managerial intensity with selection into the export market. So basically, somehow the export price can affect the way we set our managerial layers, so on and so forth. So to avoid all these comments on spurious correlation, and at the very end, we do not expect that the share of managers in a firm changes considerably across over time. So we basically fix the share of managers at the beginning of the sample. So let me mention, we basically mimic this empirical strategy from the QJE paper by Berman and Corders, and they use, and we do use, control for the rank of a specific product into the total export bundles of a given firm at destination. The idea is the following. Imagine a multi-product firm that export many products at destination. The pricing of this firm on a given product can adjust to the export bundles of product into the same destination. So we control, and this is what Nicolai and Codors did in the QJE paper, for the rank of a specific product in the export bundles into a specific destination. Okay, so that's why we have the rank. In the next step, let me anticipating you that we also have a battery of checks for multi-product firms eventually in our framework. Last point.
One more question. So you have here firm product destination fixed effect.
Yes.
And
yes, firm product
it's
country.
Yes, it's not collinear with the MI.
Yes, sure. It's totally captured the MI, but what we're interested in is the interaction between MI and the real exchange rate. We don't care per se whether MI affect the export pricing. Well, we can check for internal interest, but our model is the fact that is the second derivative, if you want. If you go back to this slide, is the fact that suction elasticity depends second derivative on the margin on the managerial intensity.
Yeah. So despite including this fixed effect, you have some effect.
Yes, exactly. And this is the baseline. This is the baseline results. So let's start from column 3 because it's the column that we prefer based on the Berman and Coder paper. So we have, as expected, positive elasticity. So the average firm increase the export price when there is a depreciation, in line with the Madison Octagonal framework. And in line with our framework, this elasticity is even stronger when the firm is managerially intensive. So when there is an increase in the share of managers in the firm. This is the coefficient. In terms of pass-through, in terms of, pricing into market, so there is a 0.8% increase after a 10% depreciation for the average firm, but the firm with one standard deviation larger managerial intensity, the elasticity goes up to 1.2%, implying a pass-through of 88%. Okay, so this is the main results, and this is what our Mickey Mouse model predicts. So everything goes in that direction. Of course, you might, I'm already 35 minutes, so let me skip the robustness check, but we have a robustness check for the strategic complementarity, so for what happens for the pricing of competitors in the same sector, and the results are basically there. We have, rather than using the share of managers in 95, we use the share of managers at the starting year. So imagine that the firm start being the sample in 98, we use the share of manager in 98. So this is a check for the sample selection in a sense. This is an important check I want to show. Imagine that we change the definition of managerial intensity, our results are there. So even if we take the managerial intensity as this alternative definition, 37 occupation, our results are there. And then you might ask, okay, but this is not a matter of managerial share, this is the quality of management that matters. Good. We interact the real exchange rate for the quality of the managers, and the quality here is the residual of a Mincian equation. in the interest of time, let me skip the procedure. I mean, I like this Managerial estimation because I worked a lot on this AKM decomposition. So I would like to spend 1 hour on this, but I cannot. Just long story short, Managerial equation, the residual is the quality of managers. And interestingly, if you interact the real exchange rate with the quality of manager, the result is not there. So it's not a story of quality. It seems to be really a story of composition, of managerial intensity of the firm. Second point, is our story there even after controlling for what other papers did? In other words, is our channel there after controlling for the heterogeneous reduction of high productive firms, the paper by Nicola and co-authors? Is our channel there after controlling for the quality of the product, which is the Amiti et al. Papers? Is our channel there even controlling for the exchange rate on the import side? Because remember, here we are looking at real exchange rate at destination, but real exchange rate can also change my imported input bundle. So, and indeed, in this table, we control for these 3 important checks. So here we introduce the interaction with the productivity of the firm. This is labor productivity, production labor productivity, and our story is there. So what matters is the managerial intensity. Then we control for the quality of the product, and our story is there. Then we control for the exchange rate on the import side, and the sign is negative in line with intuition, but importantly, our mechanism is there. So still, whatever, so we control for this alternative mechanism, but our story is there. So the elasticity of export price is magnified for managerial intensive firm. The very last check, what if we put all these alternative channels together? So here in the specification, to be honest with you, at the beginning, I was very skeptical because how we can identify our channel controlling for all other channels, but it works. So in last column, column 3, we control for the interaction with the productivity of the firm, interaction with the import real exchange rate, interaction with the quality of the product. But look, our main channel, the interaction with the managerial intensity is still there, the magnitude is there, the significance is there. So as I was mentioning at the very beginning, our channel is just something that works on top of other channels. It's a new thing that goes on top of what other papers already found. It's a really new channel. It's not something that substitute for other channels, something really new. The very last prediction of the model is on the export quantity. So as I told you at the beginning, when there is a depreciation, we do expect an increase in the exported quantity, but managerial intensive firms are expected to have a lower elasticity in line with the Melitzer-Ottaviano framework. And indeed, the main elasticity is positive. So when there is a real exchange rate shock, there is an increase in the export quantity. So this is value, this is kilos, tons, this is not value. Huh? So these are really the quantity. But the elasticity is lower, is reduced, is attenuated for managerial intensive firms. So we have an average elasticity of 2.4, but for managerial intensive firm, this elasticity is around 1.3 elasticity. So once again, in line with Melitzer-Ottaviano, extended with our proxy for managerial intensity, our predictions are there. Great, let me conclude. Pretty on time. You told me 35, 40 minutes. I am 39, 30 seconds, so really on time. Conclusion. I think you got the point. The point is that there is this macro elasticity puzzle. We propose a new solution for this puzzle, which is based on the workforce composition of firms. What do we do obtain? What do we do show? We show that when there is a depreciation of the real exchange rate at destination, firms start pricing into markets, so they increase their price. But this elasticity is even higher for managerial intensive firms. This explains the macro puzzle. Second, when there is an exchange rate elasticity, an exchange rate depreciation, firms start to export more in terms of quantity, but such an elasticity is reduced for managerial intensive firms in line with the Melitzer-Ottaviano model. So this is a take-home message from this paper. This is a new solution for the macro puzzle. As I told you at the beginning, this is very preliminary. So we already have a quite intense to-do list for the next weeks and month. First of all, we are going to dig more into the definition of quality versus quantity of managers. We are going to use the STEM classification to define the managers because we provide a robust checks. We also want to play with alternative specifications, in particular in the fixed effect. I can already tell you that by including the IT fixed effects, so controlling for anything that is IT specific, this is a very conservative specification. Our results are there. Okay, so we have a robust check with the really IT. So anything that is IT specific is control for. So we basically identify on the cross destination variation, purely cross destination, and our results are there. What else? The last thing we wanna address is, of course, the issue of multi-product firms, and we are going to the direction of Berman and Corder in working with core product exports only. So using only products that are core for the firm and drop all other product exporting to a given destination. And then I thank you for your attention. And of course, if you have questions and comments and suggestions, just send me an email. The paper is preliminary. So if you want to have a copy of the paper, just mail me and I can send you in a confidential way the paper, which is really, really preliminary at that stage. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Gianluca, for this interesting presentation. And again, I'm feeling remorse that other people could not join because of the other conference that we had. But hopefully they will see the video and they will send you their comments or questions via email. So I have a few questions, and maybe Oliver, if Oliver is the only colleague who was attending this webinar. Actually, he's also trade economist and he's working on similar issues. One thing that came to my mind, because it's very relevant to the macro perspective, is the J curve. So the J curve is, as you also know, that first it's the price effect and then the volume effect. And I was thinking, because you have a very nice trade statistics customs office data, that I think it should report everything on a monthly basis. Then I was curious to see if, because what you observe is annual basis, and we could consider annual basis as long-run effect of the exchange rate policies. What if you were using the monthly, or even if it is possible if there is any data on weekly, and see using some kind of autoregressive model that had lags of your independent variable to see how long it takes for the price effect to change into volume effect. So that's an interesting point, because then we could relate it more to macroeconomics and more to the policy that is relevant to exchange rate. And beyond that, usually the exchange rate has two-sided effects. It has asymmetric effects. So usually depreciation works differently from appreciation of exchange rate because of sticky prices, because of pre-order shipments, etc. So maybe it would be also interesting to see if you could separate your exchange rate variable into positive shocks or increasing ones and negative ones to see if the effect becomes different. Maybe managers are more interested in depreciation rather than appreciation, you know.
Mm.
And because it is very interesting to exchange rate, could we do the same thing, or maybe you have done it already, the same thing for tariffs? So trade elasticity, because you have another paper on trade elasticity that is using tariffs, right? So what about this? Does managerial skill affect the, the resilience of the firms against higher, larger tariffs? Or, it's very similar. Instead of exchange rate, it's tariffs, right?
Mm. No, I totally agree. I just noticed, and I'm writing down what you said, and honestly, these 4 points are very, very, very relevant. Let me start from the last point. On tariff, yes, this is something we are thinking about. So this is something that actually in the very first version of the paper, we had tariffs and we interacted tariff with the managerial intensity. But then we changed the definition of managerial intensity, and for some reason we didn't do, but for sure this is something we're going to test. So this is something that must be in the to-do list. Same thing for the asymmetric effect. This is something that macroeconomists will be interested. So this we're going to do as well. It's easy to do in a sense. So this is something we're going to test. And for the short versus long run, this is very nice comment. But then I'm a little bit more pessimistic, simply because I don't know whether we can have data on a monthly basis. Because I asked several times to the customs monthly data, and I never got it. So, but this is something we can lobby a little bit. And so let's put in different way. If we got data on a monthly basis, we will do this analysis. So for the time being, we don't have. So this is the answer. But in principle, of course, I agree. This will be very interesting.
Yeah. So in this regard, so if we consider the J curve, we expect that there's a price effect, but no volume effect.
At the beginning.
But at the beginning, yes. But you observe both. Yeah.
Yeah, but on a yearly basis.
On a yearly basis. So what does it mean? Where are we? Which part of J curve are we in?
I cannot tell you. What I can tell you is that we are. My way of imagining the result. So we are on the 31st of December of each year. So the total export of a firm in a year, so in terms of the quantity, this is the 21st of December, the total. So this is basically, in a sense, the steady state, let's call it this way, in a year. But in terms of price, is different. In terms of price, we have the average. So this is the average price in the year. So I cannot really tell you where we are in the J. I can tell you we are somehow in a if it does exist, a steady state in the year.
Yes. Very good. Yeah.
But yeah, sure. This point taken. If we have monthly data, we can play with the timing, of course. Yes.
And what about other occupations? So think about it like, well, because managerial intensity, let's think about the policy implication that you also referred to in the beginning. Exchange rate is relevant for policymaker, but how about managerial skills? How could it be relevant? So does it mean that we should employ more managers at firms to be to gain more rents from exports when we have volatilities on exchange rate? Or could it be another set of skill or occupation, like, like digital skills, like engineers?
Well, strictly speaking, the policy message is that firms pay attention. Having a dedicated managerial skills is important. So this is the policy message. But of course, I agree with you that we might have other occupations that are relevant for this heterogeneous effect. And indeed, in the very first version of the paper that I sent you some weeks ago, we have a specification using skill intensity, kind of general. And in the skill, we have all skilled workers in the firm. Okay? But then the problem and results are there. So I can tell you that skill-intensive firms have the same time of patterns. The problem is that from a theoretical perspective, the skill-intensive is a little bit of tricky to model, because saying that skill intensity affect the productivity is okay. It's less obvious than managers. Managers is easy to understand because managers are people that they exist to manage other people. So they reduce by definition coordination costs. So from a theoretical perspective, it's pretty the good instrument.
Right.
But I agree with you from an empirical perspective.
But also you had a similar thing, similar problem that you mentioned also when you were controlling for quality, when you had skills instead of managers, because for instance maybe skills could improve the quality, and that's why.
Yeah, this okay. Yeah, I didn't think about it before, but could be a rationale. Yeah, because basically, yeah, quality is collinear with skill intensity. So they are basically the same channel, so on and so forth. Yeah, this is another argument. But to be extremely transparent with you, the real reason is that from a theoretical perspective, I think that managerial fits better what we have in mind from a theoretical perspective.
What about other variables like digitalization or ICT?
This is extremely. We hesitated because we could use techies, technological workers in the firm. But I have a PhD student that works on digital firms, and she told me that in the reality, in this field that I don't know very well, techies, so engineers, informaticians, are not really a good proxy for the digital intensity of the firm. So at the beginning, we start thinking, okay, let's try to interact with techies, and we did it actually. We had some robustness check in the first version of the paper, but then basically we.
You know what I'm thinking is e-commerce. So
okay.
So your firms date back to 1995, right?
Yeah.
So the companies who initiated their sales or their exports or even their imports in using e-commerce, maybe they have been more successful in targeting their partners, being more resilient to shocks, than asking for higher prices, something that is different from sets of employees, sets of skills, but within the capital of the company, within the assets. The technology instead of the labor.
Yeah, I see the point. Yeah, of course, yeah, could be. We can imagine, of course, that in the model, the fact that the firm is an e-commerce firm can react heterogeneously to a common exchange rate.
Yeah, but you need a variable for that, which is, I think, difficult to find.
Yeah, no, in an ideal world with the data, this is a very nice research question, but we don't have data for this. We might proxy with the presence of high-tech guys in the firm, but I don't know whether this is a convincing proxy. But having the data would be a nice extension, of course.
Yeah. So that's why I think your paper is really interesting. It's a great contribution, major contribution in the field, and I learned a lot right now. It tricked my mind, my brain, my ideas, and that's why I asked so many questions.
Yeah, but this is very welcome. Thank you a lot for this question. Of course, I noticed everything, and we'll try to do our best with my co-authors to address all these points. Condition on the availability of data.
Yeah,
this is always the issue. This is always
of course. Yeah, Oliver, if you don't have any questions, then Oliver.
No, thank you. No questions, but thank you for your presentation. It was very lively, very interesting, and yeah. At the beginning, you said that it's very preliminary, but I think it's already very, very full, very rounded. So,
thank you.
Very good work.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for being connected. And
thank you, Gianluca.
Hope to see you in presence one day.
Yeah, hopefully, yes. Thanks a lot. We will send you the link to this recorded YouTube, and then hopefully see you again. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.